Ms. Sheila Jackson Lee, you are
Yeah, I am here.
here and you are glorious and resplendent and recognized.
I'm delighted. Thank you so very much. Thank you for, as has been said earlier, for you holding this important hearing. I almost wish I could transpose myself to the United States Senate to be able to have at least a 7 to 10 minute moment of inquiry. But before I start, let me indicate that I've heard so many people offer the name of John Lewis on the other side or the other body, including Republicans. We happen to be this weekend naming a vessel, Navy vessel, after John Lewis, more than a tribute, but I hope most of the witnesses on this panel would agree with me that the greatest tribute to John Lewis is to protect the fundamental right to vote and to reinforce the basis of the 1965 Civil Rights Act, which is the 15th Amendment. So my inquiries will go along those lines, but let me also indicate that because of the inertia and inaction of the Senate, faith leaders and Black women gathered yesterday, of which I participated virtually, along with the Democratic Texas delegation, who, contrary to Governor Abbott, is working very hard to be able to insist that there must be action in the Senate. And to the extent that our chairwoman of the Congressional Black Caucus, Joyce Beatty, was arrested, some of us will intend to do such in the coming weeks, because John Lewis did believe in nonviolent civil disobedience, and we must act. I'm very glad that the House is acting, Chairman Cohen is acting, as we move on this very important legislation. I also want to follow up and pose a question. Mr. Popper, I believe I just want to make a comment, and I would like Mr. Rosenberg, Mr. Morales Doyle, to focus on these questions. I heard the line of questioning about Section 2, that it basically is used for partisan activity, partisan challenges, and is in essence of its own self a contributor to fraud. Would you respond to the value of Section 2, and that in your course of service have not seen Section 2 be used and manipulated by individuals who are trying to be partisan? Was a voter ID legislation partisan when in the state of Texas, there were at least 8 counties without DPS officers that would allow Hispanics and others to access for the voter ID? Would you go first, Mr. Rosenberg? And my time I know is short. Mr. Rosenberg.
Yes, thank you, Congresswoman Lee, and thank you for that question. I will say 2 things very quickly. Number one, you cannot use discrimination against people of color in order to achieve partisan goals. That is unlawful, it is unconstitutional, period. And Texas photo ID law, which I litigated, we proved that it was done with discriminatory intent and discriminatory results. And I'll turn it over to Mr. Morales Doyle.
Mr. Morales, thank you so very much. Mr. Morales, would you take up the point of what I believe Mr. Popper said, is that Section 2 has only been used by those of us that engage in partisan litigation? Do you believe that that is what Section 2 has been used for?
No, I do not. Thank you for the question. Mr. Rosenberg, myself, and many of our colleagues do this work at nonpartisan organizations. Our goal is not to accomplish some partisan outcome. Our goal is to protect voting rights. That is the point of Section 2. And I would remind everyone that Section 2 and its amendments in 1982 were passed by bipartisan agreement in both houses of the legislature. The amendments in 1982 were signed into law by President Reagan. There's an amicus brief filed in this case in the Supreme Court by congressional staffers on both sides of the aisle from 1982, talking about their intent in passing this law and how it was being subverted by many of the arguments being made, which the Supreme Court ultimately took up. This is not a partisan goal that we have here. The goal is to protect voting rights. And I think sometimes folks are too quick to give the people who are passing these restrictive laws a pass, suggesting that they are acting only with partisan intent. We are talking about race discrimination. This law is meant to protect against race discrimination.
And unfortunately, it was obliterated by the Arizona case. Let me quickly raise the point of the big lie. and the continuous representation of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle of fraud in the 2020 election where 150 million people voted. Let me quickly ask one question for Mr. Rosenberg and Mr. Doyle and the other gentleman whose name I don't have right now because of where I am. But in any event, can you just give me a yes or no question? Is the filibuster, and Ms. Rosenberg, you can go first, is a filibuster part of the Constitution, yes or no?
It is not part of the Constitution.
Mr. Morales Doyle?
No, it is not.
Mr. Popper? Is it?
No, it is not.
And there's another witness there that doesn't show up on my screen. Forgive me. Can you answer, sir?
Yeah, of course, the filibuster is not part of the Constitution.
And so let me just go back to Mr. Rosenberg and Mr.
Time is expired. Be okay.
Pardon me?
Your time's expired.
Can I ask for it on the record and then I'll look for an answer later?
Sure.
All right. I'd be interested in knowing, and this is a global question, the fundamental right to vote has been evidenced by our president, and pursuant to the 15th Amendment, I'd like an answer as to whether or not the filibuster, which is a rule, would be superior to that right, therefore blocking fundamental voting rights legislation from going forward in either, well, in the United States Senate. I want to put that on the record. I thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I hope I will be able to get answers from these distinguished witnesses.